particular benefit of flexible car sharing is it integrates more easily with the public transport network because of that ability to drive one way. But there are needs for, as Jonathan said, when you need to do a round trip or you need to do a flexible trip as well. So there are a range of benefits, and I'm not going to repeat the kind of gaps that it fills. I think it's already been covered.
Thank you. Assemblymember Bailey.
Sorry, in your data, how do you profile that data? Because obviously there's different users. There's single people, people who live in and out, in town, out of town, families, small, larger. Where are the trends? Because I'm a car owner. I've always been a car owner. When I was 18, the car was just to mess about in. Now it feels like essential to my family life. How would I be involved in? Where would I pop up in your data?
Yeah, with our survey, we are very careful to make sure that we deliberately look at the profile of the members of car clubs, and yes, it's not for everybody, but about, here come the data again, about 40-something% of the types of people that live in London are open to using car clubs. They're the profile of the members of car clubs. It has to be said that there is more interest in car clubs in the denser parts of London rather than the outer boroughs, but that's a challenge that a lot of us are working on at the moment anyway. I think it's interesting though, once we look at the types of people that use car clubs, yes, it is the more affluent, better educated people that live in the denser parts of central London without doubt. But as a complement to that, there are also some quite distinct segments of people who are multicultural households, busy working households, young people setting off in their professional life. So there is quite a range of types of people that use car clubs. From our perspective as the charity that's trying to promote the social environmental benefits of car clubs, we would like to see the popularity of car clubs broadening, not for the purpose of broadening car clubs, but so that the benefits of car clubs, so money saving, changing lifestyle, all the rest of it, are spread far beyond the people that currently use car clubs, and that will need some form of intervention that isn't currently happening.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Now up to Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Alistair and Ed, in what way do car clubs really reduce congestion, or do they actually exacerbate it? We've had some evidence from the RAC Foundation which suggests particularly this one-way car club model could have the opposite effect. Who wants to go first, Ed or Alistair?
Yeah. Okay. This is a question we've been having to tackle now for I don't know, 17 years, something like that. When you set up a car club somewhere, some people that didn't used to use a car, or not very much at all, will use a car more, and that is accepted. But what we have shown over the years is that there is a significant net benefit in car use and, well, number of cars on the road, whether they're parked or moving as well. And so in order to get the benefit, of course, with anything, we also have to take the hit on some people that be using a car more. We've looked at this in detail over the years with the annual survey, and I can quote numbers to you if you like, but just to illustrate it, back to base models, so that's the traditional car club model, there is a net saving of 570 driven miles per year in London. For the flexible model, there's a reduction of 239 miles per year on average, so there is a net reduction in miles driven. I think more interestingly, though, is the car replacement statistics. So a car club car is responsible for taking 10.5 private cars off the road. So if we start thinking about parking congestion rather than traffic congestion, that clearly becomes quite significant, which has led to 26,500 fewer cars in London in the last year. And if you believe what people say about, I would have bought a car, but I didn't because I joined a car club, there's a further 60,000 cars off the road in London as well, but that is a little bit more difficult to bolt down. So yes, some people do use the cars for journeys that perhaps they wouldn't have done, but there's always been consistently over the year a net benefit in terms of miles driven and number of cars on the road.
What about the one-way model? Do you think that could, looking at the numbers that you just
Yeah.
gave us,
Yeah.
because it's a different step, I could quite see how that would tempt someone. I'm going to the theatre in town, why don't I?
Yeah.
Just get the car
Some
club
people
and
do.
drive one way. And
There's no point in pretending that some people don't, but there is a net benefit in that. And this is where, if we look at it on a journey-by-journey basis, which is always a risk to do, then we identify effects like that. But what we possibly don't see is if that person, and our data suggests they probably have got rid of one or more cars in their household as a result of these services being available, there'll be lots of other journeys that they would have made in a car that they're no longer making in a car. And I think that's the important thing to consider. And I think this is where there is a thinking which is not properly understood yet. Let's not pretend that car clubs are allowing people to change their, call it what you will, but their mobility lifestyle. Their lifestyle determined by how they travel around more generally. And car clubs are an enabler to allow broader changes in that lifestyle. And we can quote you the net impacts of those things, but clearly that is a net, which does mean that some people will use a car when they wouldn't have done, but there is a net benefit in that more people don't use a car for some of the other journeys. And I think, as I said earlier, if that person is using a car to, say, go to the cinema in the evening or go to IKEA on a Saturday or whatever, they're using a car out of peak times where we normally have the problem with cars as well. And so it sounds patronising to the other side, but it's an intelligent use of the car rather than just a default use of the car, which is generally where we start getting the problems with cars.
do you want to add
And I'd echo that. I was going to say just very briefly two things. I was going to say, I think the type of journey, as Alice is saying, is going to be out of the peak. It's unlikely to be people using a car club vehicle to commute to work or from work where congestion is likely to be bigger. But also, I don't think we should cut our noses off to spite our faces. If there is a little bit of leakage in that direction, there's a big movement and a cultural shift happening here, and I think it would be foolish to try and control that small amount of leakage and miss the bigger picture of a transition.
James, you want to
I was just going to echo the points about the driving outside of peak hours. So a driver now, we have a pay per minute model, so actively discourage people to drive at peak times, so we kind of smooth out that demand, and we see that customers drive after the peak, so after 9 AM and after 7 PM in the evening. And I think also car clubs are generally more efficient at moving people around the city compared to private cars. So again, from the Car Plus results, a private car on average has 1.6 passengers per car. We have 2.2. So again, it's just a way of moving people efficiently and addressing some of the congestion challenges in the city.
I just want to move on to
Sure.
Ed, what about the issue of we'd had evidence that new members of car clubs tend to cycle less after joining than they did previously, because they then have access at the end of their street to a lovely car club and it's a bit rainy out, so why don't they hop in the car rather than getting on their bike? Is that something you've picked up?
I don't have any evidence on that. I mean, again, I think on average in London you get rained on as a cyclist 12 times a year. If you commute every day, it's actually very infrequent if you actually manage to, unfortunately, time your bike ride to and from work in those kind of weather. So, I suspect it's quite small. There might be some anecdotal evidence. But
Alistair, do you have that evidence?
Yeah, we did some work specifically last year on the, well, we call it the longitudinal study, but it's exactly looking at that. We've always looked at what are the impacts of joining a car club in the year after someone's joined, and we've always asked those how long have you been in a car club to get the longer term one. What we wanted to do was look at the bridge between those two. So, okay, so you've joined a car club, what have been the impacts on your travel behaviour, and then what happened the next year, and then what happened the next year. And yes, we do show a bit of a bounce in that once people join a car club, they do tend to use it quite a bit then, that's fine. You still have net benefit in terms of their car mileage, but there are issues like, for instance, their cycling does go down slightly, even though walking goes up and public transport use goes up. But actually, the longer they are a member of a car club, that effect reverses, and so they will start cycling again, and actually they'll end up cycling more the longer that they're in a car club for. And I think this all comes back to this idea that we are still trying to work out formally, but it's about what's the difference between a car club car and a private car? Every time you pick up a car club car, you make a decision about the value of using that car for that journey. And that's the significant difference. In the same way that if you jump on the tube or pick up a bike, or you're thinking all the time about, is it worth me spending that money on that journey? And so yes, there is an initial an initial change in behaviour, but then it embeds into people's lifestyle, and a car is then just placed alongside other modes to make so that people just make appropriate decisions about the best way of using it. Another way of looking at it is, if the car hadn't been invented until recently, and so it had only just been invented recently and it's put alongside other travel options, how would the car be included into modern life? And I think a lot of car clubs now, and especially the diversification of models from back to base to flexible to one way, are demonstrating how the car is included alongside other modes so that people can package together these modes to fit their lifestyle in the way that's appropriate. And the idea of, you know, the James Dean model of, unless you are, you know, sitting on the fender of your car, you know, you've not made it, is just last century. You know, we've moved beyond that now. The new, when before streetcar that led into Zipcar, their whole idea of service envy rather than product envy at their launch, you know, was a key idea. It's about making people want to buy into a lifestyle of services rather than the idea of my ego and my identity is wrapped up by what car I own. And that's a fundamental change in how people have a relationship with cars.
You just said in terms of public transport, it generally increases.
Yes. Yeah,
so there's
that's
no
consistent.
evidence it decreases.
That's right, no, it increases.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Does anyone else got any other comments on cycling or use of public transport? No, I think we've covered it. Lovely, thank you.
Thank you. Right, now look towards Assemblymember Curtin.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so I'll put this question mainly to Jonathan and James. How challenging is it to arrange parking spaces for car club vehicles? I assume you have to make arrangements with the local councils around London in particular, so just like you to talk about that a bit.
Sure. I've been doing it for 11 years, so I have a fairly good idea how complicated it is. Very is the answer. I mean, London is a very challenging city to do business in if you have any requirement for parking whatsoever. Obviously, the borough structure, where you have to deal with 33 different authorities, all who control their own parking, is a challenge. And so over the last 11 years, we've been working with boroughs to help them to understand the benefits of car clubs and why actually allocating curb space to car sharing is a really positive thing to do, and this is something actually that their residents are demanding and adopting. But you know, we do have to make that case to each and individual authority. They will then have to go through a process as to how they want to get involved in the sector, how they want to allocate bays, and mark them out. So you know, that's been a gradual process for the round trip model. As I say, we now have over 2,000 bays on the streets of London across almost all authorities. But you know, that's taken a long time to get there. In terms of the flexible model, James has been doing the flexible model longer than I have, so I'll let him comment more. But it gets even more complicated because obviously you're then trying to facilitate trips from borough to borough, and therefore you need the boroughs to be even more joined up in their thinking. Two other things I want to say. So fragmented decision making in London is very, very complicated. Another thing I'd say is parking is very political, and that makes life a real challenge in terms of the growth of car clubs. So if I was really trying to reflect the social cost of having cars parked down streets, all of our residential streets, then you would charge for that social cost, where actually the parking permits across London typically cost £100, really not much more than that. And that's because parking is so political that policymakers and politicians are not willing to pass on that actual cost to society. That means that London is creating challenges for itself. So that's the second point. The third one is local authority resource. You know, very simply, over the years I've been working with local authorities, they've had less and less resource in their transport teams to be able to facilitate initiatives like ours. You know, they're forced to prioritise, and therefore making the case for putting in car club bays is very, very difficult indeed. So.
Yeah, and just echoing Jonathan's comments, it's really challenging for an organisation like Drive Now. The actual model is easy to roll out across London. We use existing infrastructure. We don't need fixed parking space. But because of the fragmented nature, as Jonathan's talked about, it's a lot slower progress. So we're having to have conversations with every borough and multiple people in those boroughs to really sell the benefits. You know, Drive Now operates across 12 European cities. We're the only city where we don't cover the majority of the city. So London is losing out on some of those benefits that we've talked about already. I think it's clear there are definitely challenges in place for rolling out further.
Just something you said there, you mentioned fixed infrastructure rather than parking bays. What does that mean?
So the flexible model that Drive Now operates, we agree kind of a universal parking permit with the local authority. So our members there's no fixed space, you find your nearest car in the app, and you can drive one way and then leave the car in any residence bay, pay and display or mixed use bay. We work collaboratively with the boroughs, so if there are certain areas where they don't want us to park, we can adapt our in-car technology and app technology so that's an area where customers can't end their booking. So it's very much a collaborative process, but it's a slower process because of the nature of London.
Yeah, okay. But you sort of agree that with local boroughs, you need their collaboration.
So we have some agreement in place with each individual borough because we're using residence bay and pay and display bay and mixed use bays. There's no overarching authority for parking and roads for London. Yeah. So it's a conversation with every individual borough to get those agreements in place. And for residents, if I'm using the service, I don't recognise the boundary between one borough to the next. I'm just doing a trip. So, we're minimising the benefits and positive benefits for London.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on something you said, Jonathan. I mean, you mentioned there's 2,000 bays, that you've sort of got access to at the moment. But I believe the car club strategy wants to increase membership of car clubs to about 1 million by 2025. So at the moment, there's just under 200,000 users, I believe. So that means a 5-fold increase in members. That will probably mean you need a 5-fold increase in bays to about 10,000 by 2025. I mean, is that going to be possible, or would that, how will that work?
It's not quite that simple. So in terms of the potential, yes, there's a number of studies shown that obviously car clubs have come a great deal to 200,000 members, but the potential in London for the concept is really significant. So 1 million members is what Frost and Sullivan said they believe was the potential, and that's because London is very well suited to car sharing, such a strong public transport network. The need to own a car here in London is actually considerably less than most other European cities. In terms of what that would then require, again, it depends on the model. So that number said that 1 million would be achieved between a variety of car club models. Some would be round trip, which is what Zipcar's traditionally offered, and that therefore will require fixed car club bays. Other parts of that would be created by flexible car sharing, which doesn't require any fixed bays. So to get that kind of increase, it would definitely mean an increase in fixed bays, but not the whole of that 5-fold increase wouldn't be in fixed bays, if you see what I mean, because some of it would be taken by flexible, which doesn't require it.
So it might be a 3- or 4-fold increase rather than a 5-fold increase, perhaps. Yeah,
perhaps.
Because of different models.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the one-way model, the fixed model. Is it there a floating model as well? That's the other thing that we mentioned before.
So that's the Drive Now model, the flexible model where there's no set location. That's that one.
So that doesn't need fixed bays either.
No,
you can
so
park wherever.
The cars are basically left where the last customer used them. They can drop off it in a residence bay or pay and display bay or mixed use. The next customer uses their app to find the nearest car, and then they take that. So they're moving those cars around the city.
Okay, thanks. I was wondering if Ed and Alistair got anything.
I have one thing before, and if just in terms of your question, is that possible? That will only happen if people are adopting this concept. So if we have 1 million members and those members have given up private cars, the space that creates on our streets is really, really significant. So that will more than create the space to put in any additional car club infrastructure required. So it very much will be demand driven. That frees up space. That's what will facilitate it.
Because you said earlier, every one car club creates 10.5 parking spaces, perhaps free for that.
But at the rate that we're going at, we won't hit that 1 million target. Because of that fragmented nature, we're not seeing that across the whole of London. So there needs to be a change that supports both models. We've seen in other cities, from a Drive Now perspective, in Germany, where flexible car sharing joined the market, there was a huge increase in members of car clubs. So it helps drive both traditional car clubs, but also flexible car clubs as well.
Yeah, I think I might not have time to. Yeah.
You want to carry on?
Yeah, wanted to just pick up on Germany. I mean, you mentioned Germany, but most cities in Germany are much smaller than London. I mean, Berlin perhaps is half the size of London with 12 boroughs. London's got 33. So are you comparing like with like if you mention Germany, or is it easier to deal with local authorities and cities there?
It's certainly easy to deal with authorities there. I think there's one authority for the cities there. And yes, Berlin is a smaller city, but I think we've spent our first 2 years of operating in London proving that the model works. I think we've got evidence now that it does, and we're keen as a business to expand, and we're working with boroughs to achieve that. But as we've talked about already, it's slightly slower than we'd hoped.
Okay, yeah.
Can I just clarify with you, James, can you name which boroughs you actually operate this one-way car club in,
Yeah, so we
please?
operate currently in the boroughs of Hackney, Haringey, Islington, and the southern part of Waltham Forest.
So just repeat that. Haringey, Hackney
Islington and the southern part of Waltham
You'd rather
Forest.
sort of drop us a note
and
on
Waltham Forest, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's only in one cluster of London, so it's not the Westminsters, it's not some of the other areas where car clubs are already popular,
Yeah.
Southwark, Lambeth.
Just in the northeast at the moment, and we're working with all the boroughs to expand and hopefully get those benefits for Londoners and for London as a whole. We started small so we could build up that evidence base and work with, collaboratively with the boroughs.
Okay, thank you.
that. Sorry, the parking, that's interborough, so if
Yes, so I could, a member could pick up a car in Hackney, they could drive one way to Islington and drop the car there, so the cars move around the boroughs.
Okay, thank you. Right, now look to Assemblyman Dr. Soha.
Great. I just want to look at what needs to be done to increase the membership of the clubs in London. So that's what I want to explore, right? And also the differentials between outer London and inner London. I mean, there are some parts of London which have only, say, 500 cars in the outer Londons and up to 10,000 in some parts of central London. So what the reason for those differentials are and what we can do to increase the membership. Who's going to start?
I'll go first. I mean, in terms of what more can we do to get from where we're at today of that 200,000 members up to the 1 million members that studies show is possible, I think first and foremost a concerted policy to tackle private car ownership and car dependency. For all the reasons that I started off by saying, London has to change its relationship with the car. So how do we do that? That's going to be a mixture of providing great alternatives that includes the car. I think that's got to be a great public transport system, cycling, yes, but then also how are you going to provide for the car? So I think that's up for services like ourselves to provide really compelling alternatives to private car ownership as part of a wider transport mix. I think that policy will also include, it will be carrots and sticks ultimately. So I think it would be disincentivising private car ownership, increasing. That's already happening with increased charges on second parking permits. First parking permits are increasing. So I think the cost of owning and driving a car in London is likely to increase. I think that's going to have to be part of the mix as we try and accommodate this growing population. I think trying to integrate all of those options better together, I think, will also form part of it. So how can we make it really simple for Londoners to make the most sensible transport decision for any kind of trip they have to do? Would it basically be a journey planner or something like that that includes the car as well? So I think how can we bring the car in a more integrated fashion into the transport mix, but allow people to do it in the most efficient way, and we believe car clubs is that.
Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about the fragmented nature of the number of boroughs in London. I think, from my perspective, I'd like to see closer engagement between the boroughs and the mayor to deliver a united approach to parking and road management. I'll be looking to the mayor's transport strategy to really see some direction for boroughs around how we can drive car club use.
And I think we could have some direct incentives as well. We could look at, some sort of, not scrappage payments, but, free membership of car club if you voluntarily give up your car. It tends to kind of question the additionality element. I mean, I'd echo the other things there. There are obviously creative things we can do around, which are already being done to a certain extent with surge pricing around the vehicles, but also I think the integration and the vision of mobility as a service, and again integrating all these different multimodal elements. People are now very familiar with doing multimodal journeys which involve foot, city bike, bus, tube, tram, and getting all of those components from things like the TfL app and City Mapper and others. And I think if you can integrate car clubs into that as well, then it just becomes a part of this seamless mobility as service piece. And then I think that leads to what Alistair's alluded to as this intelligent, pragmatic use of the vehicle, which means you don't need ownership.
So why is there a differential between the inner London boroughs and the outer London boroughs? What's the reason behind that? Why is the uptake poor in the outer London boroughs compared to inner London boroughs?
So we operate London-wide, so we're in from Enfield in the north, Croydon in the south, Abbey Wood in the east, and Hounslow in the west. So car clubs do now reach almost London-wide, but there is no doubt about it that they work best in the areas where there is high population density and where there are the best alternatives as to how to get around. So there is no doubt about it. The case to live without a private car in inner London is very strong indeed. There are so many ways that you can get around without the car that actually owning one seems crazy. In outer London, making that case is more difficult. There are trips which are much more difficult to do without your own car. So I think we've started and set up this concept. We've only been around 12 odd years by convincing people where the case is easiest to make, and that's in inner London. That's spread out to outer London, and so we now do have a good membership base in outer London, but it is a more difficult case to make. So I think as we head towards that 1 million member mark, it will come from a mixture of inner and outer, but we see it as a start in the core and the inside, and then the case will be easier to make on the outside. So we believe the concept works, but it's...
So areas which have a low housing density and a greater ownership of cars are more difficult for you to penetrate.
Very much so. Very much so. As if there's no disincentives to own a car, so you have no trouble parking whatsoever, you've got a parking space outside your house every day, you need to use a car to do certain types of trip because there aren't any public transport alternatives, it's going to be very difficult to persuade you into a car club. So that is just a fact.
Okay. And how can you advertise or spread your message around to companies who operate fleets of cars? How can they become your customers? What's their incentive to go over to your model rather than have their own car fleets?
So we're working with businesses and trying to encourage that shift to use flexible car rather than a fleet of cars. Again, one of the challenges at the moment for us is that we only operate in a limited area. So there are certain trips that businesses can't make with the Drive Now model, but we are making progress there, and we continue to do that. That's definitely a focus for the business.
Yes, Alistair?
I think there's two main points here. I think to an extent, dare I suggest that London's still in a bit of denial about the car, in that, and I think it's important to note in that, cars are evil, full stop, is not the case at all. Cars are very useful tools, and if we think that people are going to not use a car, then we're not going to get anywhere. And I think what car clubs offer is a very, very positive solution to how cars can be used intelligently in modern life in a way that reduces their impact and in a way, environmental impact, how we want to define that, and in a way that leads to much more social fairness in terms of access to mobility generally, I guess. And so the fact that a car club clearly involves using a car is about the only similarity between that and other policy relating to the car. And I think that is one thing that is still not properly understood or acknowledged across London. And I think, therefore, there needs to be a London-wide sort of coherence in a kind of 21st century view of the role of the car in the development of London as a world city. And we're not there yet, because we still have this problem in terms of how we deal with cars in London. And I think what Jonathan's been saying about, it's about compelling lifestyle offers where a car is a part of that. We're still not doing that. Or if it is being done, it's seen as partisan because it's by operators or whatever. But there is a huge, huge opportunity there for a coherent, compelling case for how cars fit into the future of London. It just so happens they're not privately owned. Now that's the fundamental and significant difference. And therefore we build it into how London develops, how lifestyles in London can develop, how business in London develops in a completely different way in terms of what's the value and use of low-emission cars in the future of London, and what are the models for making sure that is captured as best as possible. I think your point about, well, it's fine, but in outer London we still have very, very low usage of cars. I think one thing that is where we look to the rest of the country rather than London becomes quite revealing here, in that there are all sorts of, well, there's diversification of car club models in London, in the centre of London. There's other sorts of models outside London that don't really develop here, and we're not quite sure why. Car clubs are rooted in community development in terms of the history of it, and I'm not suggesting that in central London communities are going to start getting together to develop a car club. But when they do, you get different types of people involved. You get different sorts of models. You get not-for-profit community interest, cooperative models of sharing of cars rather than the development of car clubs. We don't see that in London, which is a significant difference. Once you get to lower density areas outside London, different models start working. So very low-cost models, peer-to-peer models of car access. The link between car club models and car rental becomes more important, I suppose. And so it's what's not happening in London that is perhaps important to consider, as well as considering rightly how we get the existing models in London to spread beyond their core areas.
Do we have any idea why it's not happening?
No. I could probably think of an idea, but I think there's nothing. I would be bluffing to pretend that I could.
Because I can see the case for inner city London where there's a lot of transport and high density.
Yep.
I can see that case, and the intelligent decision would be to use the shared car pool. But in the outer London, the dynamics are totally different, right? And I wonder if why wouldn't be. And I can see why people wouldn't be uptaking it so much, right?
I think I could probably suggest how we could progress what could happen in outer London by perhaps deliberately trying to understand, and some work's been done on this already, so I'm not suggesting it hasn't, but deliberately trying to understand the relationship that the sorts of people that live in lower density outer London neighbourhoods have, not only with the car but how they travel and all sorts of other things to do with social norms, and then start to use that as a basis to understand how we can unhook some of that lifestyle from dependency on private cars, to try to start replacing that with other models of access to cars in those sorts of areas. Now, no one at the moment necessarily has an interest in doing that, but that could be something that could start to allow us to understand how that could happen. And I think explicit focus in the emerging mayor's transport strategy will probably start asking those questions in a much more deliberate way. And then I think we'd start to understand much more clearly the role of the existing models of car clubs, but also the opportunity for models that don't exist here but exist elsewhere, or perhaps new models which provide people with access to a car when they need it that we don't currently see. The car club sector is changing rapidly, so there are models out there that we don't fully understand yet that could indeed become important.
I know that my colleagues are very keen to keep push on, but if you come across any information or data which you can share with us, which may be relevant to outer London's boroughs, it would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Assemblyman Bailey, you wanted to...
Just a few points. I think we're talking about cars as a problem. When you live in the outer boroughs, cars are seen entirely as a boon. And you talked about policy effort to change it, but it seems that all the effort is on the political side. Surely there's some effort that needs to be made on the models, on your business side. For instance, most of us who live in the outer boroughs, my car is parked probably all week, but on the weekend I want to use it. And if I feel like I'm going to have to make several different bookings across the weekend, then I won't. I'll keep my car. And surely that's something of a business model change rather than a political effort change. And where is your tipping point? Because there's a point where I need high availability of the car all the time. It needs to be close to my house, and it needs to be immediate, or so I won't bother, because currently my car is very close to my house, and I have access to it all the time. So where would I make the swap, and why?
I think there's a few things I'd say. First of all, I was really clear that we as operators need to present a compelling product to persuade Londoners to shift. So I'm not trying to say this is political responsibility. You know, we've been trying to offer this service to Londoners and made significant progress over many years. So there's a lot that's under our control, but equally there's also some things that are under political control. So if you want to offer new models that will work for trip types that people want, then you are going to need local authorities to facilitate that. So flexible is a prime example. You need local authorities to allow you a permit that will allow you to pick up a car from one place and drop it off in another. So it needs to be a partnership between authority and operators to present something really compelling to residents that will allow them to give up the private car. The second thing I'd say is and it's been said already, this concept is not for everyone. If you need a car day in, day out, or very, very regularly, then you are probably going to be better off owning one. The economics will make sense for you to own one. Where car clubs can really, really come into their own is if you only have occasional need, that is where this service can work best. So I think, you know, we're not trying to say that Londoners' car needs are a one-size-fits-all. They're definitely not. And I say there will be some parts where, you know, we're not going to penetrate because you know, it's a very... Owning a car is just going to make sense, and so you might fall into that bucket. But you know, I think we're focused on continuing to provide as many different trip types as we can that will mean that people don't feel they need to hang on to that car, because exactly what you just said, it is not efficient use of our city's resource to have a car sat there 5 days of the week doing absolutely nothing. We've got as a city to try and change that, and so we'd like to work sector and authorities together on that.
The last thing I want to say is there's that concept of the first mile and the last mile. The one thing that the outer boroughs do have that I feel you could address is that first mile. There's that car sharing thing. We all live within the distance of said station. That's, you know, you look at a map, you buy a house that's near a station. But I don't feel that's being answered. Every day I go into my car park and it's rammed, and you always see people circling and circling. Why isn't someone addressing that? Because that's a steady, regular business, and you can identify where those people are coming from.
So travelling from home to a station, for
Yeah.
example, I think most authorities would say that it depends on the trip length. I think most would say that authorities would be focused on that being done by walking or cycling. But if there's a slightly longer and there's a one-way trip need, then that's exactly the kind of use case where you do need to be able to facilitate one-way trips. And so working with local authorities to allow us to be able to pick up that car, say, near where you live, and drop it off somewhere near the station, there might be something that they could work together on. But, yeah.
Sorry, could I just...
You wanted to,
Could I just come back on that?
very quickly, yeah.
Yep, okay. I think there are two things that you demonstrate quite neatly in that, yes, indeed, as Jonathan said, you know, some people are going to need a private car for the foreseeable future, and no one's saying otherwise. What we have found, though, is that it's not necessarily the first car, certainly in lower density boroughs, that are the opportunity for car clubs, but it's the second car in households. And so you may need your first car in your household, but there are an awful lot of households where the second car sits on the drive not doing anything as the kind of insurance car, I suppose. And so getting rid of that second car is the useful thing. I think you also demonstrate quite nicely, though, that if your car is sitting on the drive for most of the week, then there are now models, peer-to-peer models, which means that, well, why can't someone else use your car? That is becoming one of the new models, so it doesn't have to be an operator that supplies cars, but you as a car owner. I rent my car through a peer-to-peer network to other people in my village where I live. And so this is where I'm suggesting that new models may develop and emerge that allows the car as a resource to be used more efficiently. So the person that might use your car might not then have to own a car in their household, or might not have to own a second car. So it's about efficiency of use of the resource rather than necessarily how do we make this car club model work in that neighbourhood.
So you need to break the link between my car and the car.
Yeah.
At this point,
Absolutely.
my car is very personal. It's not, I was going to say hairbrush, I don't have any hair. But it's it's my car. It needs to become the car.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblyman McCurtain, come...
Yeah, just quickly want to pick up on one of the points about, you know, the last mile and the first mile and making it more convenient. I mean, We hear something about, you know, a lot about driverless technology at the moment, and you know, it's not efficient now, but by 2025 it'll probably be a lot better. Has anyone thought about using driverless technology to overcome the sort of problem of the first mile, the last mile, so something could, you know, drive itself half a mile from a depot to your house so you can pick it up and it'll make it much more convenient? Is that something you've been thinking about?
Shall I start? I just to say, I also don't work for a car club, so this is a kind of slightly different perspective. But I think this is one of the key challenges here in terms of rapidly evolving innovation and trying to get the gears of government and regulation to move at the same speed as the technology is moving. And in a way, we're already doing kind of a rearguard action, trying to catch up with where the kind of the cutting edge of peer-to-peer lending and these models are already at. There's a report out recently from Rethink X, which is looking at the kind of the potential disruption of autonomous electric vehicles. And they're saying as quickly as 8 years. So, you know, as I say, 2025 is not out of the realms of possibility, perhaps a little bit further out than that. But I think the key thing here is that will be genuinely disruptive in terms of this mobility as a service, because it will be cheaper, it will be more convenient, it will be as accessible to everyone, and it will remove all of the headaches, as you say, of parking. The bigger question then will be, where do we have the depots where all the autonomous vehicles go to sleep at night, or, you know, or go and be parked up? So, but these are the things we should be anticipating, I think, and starting to plan for, because that's what leadership in transport in the capital has to be about, rather than a managerial approach of kind of managing the status quo, because there is disruption coming down the pipe which is going to be extraordinary, and we need to ride that wave rather than be paddling in the backwater way behind it.
Can we come back to, I'm sorry, can we come back to driverless cars, because that's, my colleague's got that in a future question. Senator O'Connell, you wanted to quick...
Just very brief, I apologise for being late, and if I did miss it, I'm sorry for it. What I haven't heard or read anything is about costs. I've done a long debate about your tariffs and your costs and this, that and the other. But particularly in outer London, where the membership is tiny, I don't know if anyone has used any of your services from Croydon and Suttons. I do apologise for that on your behalf. But costs might be a factor. So particularly if it's a one-off journey where public transport isn't well served, one had to get from an A to B, which was very difficult, and wanted to use a car, a cab could cost me £5 or £6. I've used it to go to hospitals and things like that. How competitive are you if you're in outer London for a one-off trip that needed a car? You know, there could be a cab of £5 or £6, gets me there, gets me back, £12. How does that just compare? I don't have a full debate about it, but I haven't heard anything about the costs. Would anyone like to comment on that?
From a flexible model kind of going one way, we don't currently operate in Croydon.
I know
but
that,
in terms of comparisons to pricing, we're around 20% cheaper than a taxi.
Right. Okay.
Depending on obviously the time of day that you're travelling and what the traffic's like.
Okay. That's interesting.
But we price ourselves that we're more expensive than public transport. So it's not about moving away from one to the other. It's part of that whole transport mix.
You're cheap. Your offering is cheaper, though clearly may well be more difficult in process to say, oh dear, I want to get somewhere. I'll call my cab or my app, or... Sorry?
You said taxi, not private
You say
hire.
yeah, what about private? You said taxi, not private hire. Good point by my colleague there. Could I open it up to anybody else, just quickly, to answer the competitive piece to hire a cab as opposed to a black taxi to outer London, need to get somewhere. I call my local cab firm in Purley, it would charge me £7 there, £7 back. Why would I want to use your services and go through the process as opposed to picking up that phone to do that? Anybody? Or am I missing something?
No, I mean, I would say we equally don't offer a one-way service in Croydon. So the way that people use...
No, I'm talking anywhere in London, forget Croydon. I mean, just generally, as a principle, I'm just asking as a principle, compare your services with just a local private cab firm. That's all.
I would say there are plenty of kind of trips which people will use us for that they would never use a cab for. So if I'm getting out of town at the weekend, if I'm going to do an IKEA shop where I need a vehicle for 3 hours, would I take a taxi? I probably wouldn't. Okay. So I have a range of options that are available to me as a Londoner. Yes. Some it will make sense to use a car club car. Yes. Some it will make sense to use a taxi. Okay. And I say by providing that range of options, you don't need to own a car. So I don't see us as a competitor to a taxi or private. I see us fulfilling a need that means you don't have to own a private car.
Sorry, thank you, Chair.
I think, just to answer the question in a slightly different way, what we've found over the years as well is It's not just the journey-by-journey cost comparison, which is the main motivator for using car club vehicles. It's if in joining a car club you can get rid of a private car, there are significant cost savings in not owning a private car. Now, that's not generally how people think about the cost of car use, without any doubt, and it's taken us years to, and we're still,
Sorry,
you know...
Alistair, you have covered that earlier.
Had that,
Very well.
even I heard that debate earlier.
Fine,
So thank you,
okay.
sir. Yeah.
All right, that point's been very well made. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. Assemblymember Copley, thank you for your patience.
Right there. I'll start by saying I'm a Zipcar member, and it's very useful on the odd occasion I need to go to IKEA with a van. So yes, my question is on integration, and I'll start with James and work along. And it's in what ways could TfL integrate car clubs into the transport system?
I think there's a lot that can be done. I think there's a lot of interest around mobility as a service that has been talked about already here today. I think that's where the user gets the best possible journey for the journey that they're making, and that encourages multimodal use. So we're keen to work with TfL to integrate more. I think there's challenges around being a commercial operator, around kind of that integration. That I think we need to work with to look at that. So if you look at think something like mobility as a service, there's one operator that controls that and determines the best route for the trip that you're making. As a commercial operator, we're trying to build loyalty and build that customer brand loyalty, and we invest quite heavily in that. So I think it's important that we'd still retain some of that as part of mobility as a service. But in principle, I think we're very much for it.
Do you think the car club should be an option in the TfL's journey plan?
Yes.
Alistair, do you want
Yes. Without doubt, not just TfL's journey planner, but Google Maps, City Mapper, all the rest of it. The car has to be put...
City Mapper, I know you can, it's, for example, City Mapper appears to be integrated with Uber and, other things.
That's right.
It appears in there.
Yep. No, without doubt. I mean, these, and this again is shifting from the idea of cars are a bit of a problem to actually intelligent car use is part of the solution in London, and that thinking is the thing that will drive this inclusion of different car models into journey planners, booking. What we need to get to is full booking and billing platforms, and, well, if not Oyster cards, then contactless to book and open your car as well. It just needs the political will to do it.
So you think you should be able to use Oyster card as well?
I mean, I can point to Leeds, Norwich, Nottingham, Exeter, all these other places that have smart cards, Reading, where you can book and pick up your car, and in some cases your bike, all on the same platform as you can get on the bus as well. So it can be done. There aren't any there are tech difficulties, but there are no technological barriers to it. It just requires the political will to do it.
What about being able to book cars from any company on a single platform? And James mentioned the importance, of maintaining your individual brands. But if there was a single platform that you could book sort of from any of your companies, would that be useful?
We looked at this specifically 2 years ago. The idea of car clubs being interoperable is a non-starter. The idea of a, kind of car clubs UK aggregator, so just join that and use any car club, that's not going to happen. Most of the operators are keen that their services are integrated into journey planning and travel planning services. That's the solution to it, and that is the best solution, because that means that cars from whichever operator can be chosen as appropriate for a journey alongside other modes for that journey. That's the holy grail. It can be done, and it's probably not far away, but it just needs to be done.
Excellent. Jonathan, Ed, do you want to comment on the question of integration?
Yeah, I mean, probably not too much to have it from those guys. I would say awareness is still a big issue for car clubs. To say whilst we've made huge strides, there is a lot of people that have no idea what car sharing is a solution. So I think if you can bring it into the fold, like another form of public transport. So I think the lines between what is public transport and what is private are starting to blur a little bit. So if we could present that holistically to Londoners and say, here's all of your options, including the car. So whether it be simple things like car sharing bays, have the TfL roundel with car share, it just gives a bit more credibility, brings car sharing into the mix, where at the moment we've got public transport modes and we've got car sharing as this slightly strange annex to the side that lots of people haven't heard of. I think just bring it into the fold a bit more. Equally, mobility as a service, it's going to happen. I, as a Londoner, don't want multiple apps to get around. I want one that is going to tell me the simplest routes to do any kind of trip. So for us, it's who's going to provide that, but car clubs have to be a part of that mix where I've got one transport account and I can get into a car club car, and I can get into a bike share, etc.
And I think just building on that, I mean, firstly, I think there's an opportunity for a public-private partnership in transport that works, and actually works and delivers for people. But it's in terms of the kind of the competitive element of bringing different people under the same banner. I mean, you've then become part of a much bigger pot and a much bigger market. So if it's integrated under TfL Oyster, then whilst every company wants to retain its own identity and develop its own loyalty, you know, you're then part of a much bigger pool of potential customers if everyone's integrated into the same system. Helsinki, which has done some really interesting work in pioneering, you know, genuine integration, you can now buy bundles, you know, for your transport, which gives you free citywide public transport, 100 kilometres of taxi journey, you know, and a number of kilometres of car share as well, or car club. So you're getting the whole thing on one card, and you know you've got this capacity, which really, again, changes this cultural mindset about mobility as a service. And I think that's the key thing. So you don't become wedded to the economic dependency of the car because you've bought the bloody thing, so you're going to use it. You then just see it as, in the same way that the city bikes acted as a brilliant intervention, and people suddenly realising they can hop on a bike and make some of those journeys that they'd usually been sat on a bus for.
Can I just make one add-on point to that? But one of the reasons I've heard that kind of thing not happen here is because if we make it so simple for people to use a car, then suddenly everyone's going to start jumping in cars that would otherwise use public transport. I just don't see it like that. I think Londoners are actually quite rational about how they get around. The most common question I get asked is, did you come to this meeting in a zip car? No, because it would take it would take so long to do it. So I think, you know, the opportunity here is to make something compelling to get people out of private cars and not worry that there might be some trips that people might use a car for that they didn't previously use. So keep your eyes on the bigger win rather than be paralysed by fears about everyone jumping in cars.
And if I could just move on now to...
Sorry, before you do...
no, I'm coming on the end. It was just coming on the end of this item, so it's fine.
Sorry, I just wanted to move on to the subject of driverless cars and whether or not you'd consider introducing those into your fleets. Jonathan, can I ask you?
Yes, certainly. I mean, as I say, there is a huge debate as to when driverless cars will actually properly pervade. From Tesla, who might say 2021, to others who will go, you know, it's not far, 10 years later than that. So I'm still far from clear as to when driverless cars is going to become a reality. We certainly can foresee a day, though, where all the modes starts to converge, basically, where a car, you know, a taxi is the same as a car share vehicle. They all become one, effectively. So it's who is going to provide those. We can foresee a day where, you know, we are a fleet operator, where people can choose either a self-drive car and book a Zipcar to drive themselves, or on the same app they can have an autonomous drive vehicle where they don't drive it. So, you know, we as an operator, we know how to operate fleet, and we can definitely see ourselves offering a mixture of both. When? To be honest, I have no idea. But we can see that day coming.
And any other? Yes, James?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think if you look at autonomous vehicles, they're likely to be shared, they're likely to be electric. We're already offering a fleet of shared vehicles that are electric, and we have a membership base. So we can act as a bridge to adoption of driverless technology as and when it's available within London. I think we're helping to bring people into that.
And just to add to that, just as a slight curveball, it's also going to be disruptive for all sorts of other services, because you only have to service an electric vehicle every 500,000 miles. So once you have autonomous electric vehicles, we're going to see garages, mechanics, everyone else going out of business too. So there's ripples of disruption which come out from this, and it's coming fast.
Interesting.
There's, I mean, how much work is currently being done on the impacts of potential impacts of autonomous vehicles? I think there is almost a suggestion, an awful lot of money being spent on very pretty pictures about how neighbourhoods are going to look once we're all liberated through autonomous vehicles. And, believe me, the Emperor isn't wearing any clothes on this one, in that the only way that we're going to get the benefits of autonomous vehicles is fairly clear political will to make sure that they're used appropriately. And I think that means that they are shared rather than one person calling their autonomous vehicle to come to their door to pick them up, because that will definitely generate an awful lot more traffic that doesn't currently exist. But the potential for autonomous vehicles to reduce a lot of the impacts of cars is very high, and the sharing of that as a resource is clearly one part of it. But that's probably not going to happen if the market just leads it. That will require political intervention to make sure that they're used appropriately for public benefit. And Jonathan's absolutely right. What is the boundary then between let's use today's language, a car club autonomous vehicle, a taxi autonomous vehicle? It's all going to blur. But it requires some fairly clear thinking from a policy point of view to make sure that those vehicles are introduced in a way that's to the public benefit rather than adding to the problem of cars on the road.
Presumably with the disruptive effect would probably affect taxis and private high vehicles as well.
That's why they're all trying to develop, Uber has huge plans for electric vehicles and others will do the same, because obviously their biggest overhead is the cost of the driver.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Assembly Member Russell.
Yes, sorry, slightly just going back to the integration with the transport system. I'm someone who joined Zipcar, I think probably about 10 years ago. We got rid of our second car of the household, and then 4 years ago we got rid of our main car, so we are now fully car free. And I live in inner London, in Islington, so there are so many alternatives that in fact we very rarely even use a Zipcar, because as Jonathan says, it makes no sense to use a car in central London because it's slower than most of the other ways of getting around. But the area where I think so I sometimes talk to people who live locally and ask, why do you still keep a car? Because it sits there parked week after week and you only use it to go out of London occasionally to somewhere where there isn't any public transport. And I'm just wondering if any work is going on at rail hubs around the country to provide car club cars for people who are car free now in London, and there are quite a lot of them, who actually do sometimes want to go to places where there is no public transport. They're quite happy to make the majority of the journey by public transport and get to wherever it is, sort of Sheffield or whatever, by train, but then want to have access to a car so that they can get to the places that they're trying to get to near Sheffield that don't have public transport. And because that is actually, I think, one of the tipping things that would actually make more people give up on actually owning a car. Because at the moment they're just hanging on by a thread. They're using it. They still own it, but they only use it to go to IKEA once every 3 months and to drive out of London very occasionally.
No, and I speak to the same people, and it's so frustrating because we're so nearly there in terms of our ability to persuade them away, but they are hanging on to it for that one occasion they have in their mind where they might need it. There is some work going on. For example, I know Virgin Trains partnered with Enterprise Car Club to offer cars at stations up the East Coast Main Line for exactly that point. So you take train for the majority of your journey, and then the car club car acts as the last mile. I think that the challenge is trying to create enough critical mass of people that want to do that to warrant the cars. But certainly, we've also spoken to a number of rail franchise bidders that are doing similar things. I'd say, again, trying to present it in a really compelling way, so when people are booking their train, why not, do you need a car at the end of your trip? It needs to be presented quite holistically. Otherwise, when we've done it before, we haven't seen the level of demand to warrant those cars. But I certainly see the need. I don't think we as an industry have quite cracked it yet.
Yes, it is happening, but it's not happening enough, I think it would be fair to say. I think most main cities now have car club vehicles near the main rail stations. I think it would be fairly fair to say. In my previous role, I worked for the Lake District National Park Authority. We put cars at the 3 West Coast mainline railway stations for exactly that, and we monitored it to death. And yes, people were coming to the Lake District for a weekend on the train and picking up a car at 11 o'clock at night at the railway station when they wouldn't otherwise be able to get a car. It was effectively used, though, as as rental for the weekend. This is the blurring between what is a car club, what is rental. It's another blurring of boundaries, but it means that people can get off a train when the rental place would normally be closed and still pick up their car using the account that they use in their day-to-day life, I suppose. So yes, that is indeed it. And it was done to save the carbon of the main part of the car journey that wasn't needed. Someone needed a car at the far end, so why were they driving 250 miles as well just to get there?
Yeah.
It's happening, it's not happening enough.
All right, thank you. Just to quickly wrap up, do we think that car clubs are receiving the support they need from TfL and the boroughs? And what more could they or should they do? Just very quickly, in a nutshell. James?
So we work really closely with boroughs, and I think, you know, Jonathan's already said they're challenged for resource to kind of implement some of these things as quick as we'd like. I think the biggest challenge for us is the collaboration between TfL, the boroughs and the mayor to give some real direction and clarity of how we can expand car clubs across London and get the benefits for all Londoners.
Yeah, I would say we don't think that we get the support. I mean, start with the basic. Do we believe that we as a city are really trying to tackle the car and how we want to use a car going into the future? I think our view on that is no. I don't see any concerted effort for us to tackle that issue. I don't see a direction that comes from here to Transport for London to develop those kind of policies that then filter down to how they can support our kind of industry. So you know, I don't think we're doing enough. I think stuff has been done, and I don't want to take that lightly at all. I think TfL have supported car clubs over the years. They were integral to putting in some of the fixed bays that we have at the moment. But if you sit it in the context of some of the challenges we face as a city, we need to do an awful lot more, and I don't see anything that will lead to that happening right now.
I must say that I'm very grateful to TfL because they've been funding us to do the Car Club annual survey for quite a few years now, so we're very, very grateful to that at one level. At another level, though, and it's the point I raised before, TfL need to strategically endorse new models of car use across London rather than hiding about car use. And I know that's politically really difficult, but that is what is required. And in the context of this meeting, various models of car clubs we think are the solution to how it's the enabler of being able to talk about cars for a 21st century world city. And I don't think any of us, we could speculate, but none of us really understand why that has not been endorsed and embraced by TfL. But that is the main thing that needs to happen. Brilliant. And that needs to happen so that, and I'm thinking about, you know, I'm digging inside Ed's brain here as I'm saying these things, with that very confident public support for the idea of car clubs, it is with that support that people and businesses would feel confident and almost be given a license to feel that using those services is for them in the same way that using other public transport services and walking and cycling is for them. It needs that fundamental coherent endorsement at a London-wide level for the use of car clubs.
Good, thank you. Ed, did you want to?
Well, he said it pretty well. But,
yeah.
But I think just to echo it slightly, but it is about a shift in mindset that this is just another element of an integrated public transport mix. We've got to get out of the mindset of different modes of transport competing for road space and competing with each other. It's about different modes of transport collaborating and being cooperative with each other. And I think that is this mobility as a service is really the key to unlocking that. But that needs to come in a visionary way. It's like, how do we see transport functioning within the next 10 years in London? And it should be this collaborative mix coming together.
Brilliant. All right, well, thank you very, very much indeed, gentlemen, for your time and imparting all your knowledge. It's been very informative, very helpful. Hopefully we can nudge the Mayor in the right direction in relation to car clubs with the information we've gathered today. So thank you very much. The meeting will continue, but as I say, don't feel obliged to hang around, and thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
whilst we're waiting for our guests to come back, should we just knock off a few of the items? So if we can do number 9, actions taken under delegated authority. We happy with that?
Agreed.
Agree with that? Yep. And then item 10, the work programme.
It's different. The numbering's different to what's in the agenda.
Is it? Ah,
Yeah.
right. Thank you. Sorry. 9. So number 9 is personal budgets in the door-to-door transport services. So we're happy to accept that.
Note your report, yeah.
Yep.
Very good report, Chair.
Thank you. Number 10 is traffic congestion. We happy with that?
Yeah.
Number 11, action taken under delegated authority.
Yeah.
Yep.
Agreed, yeah.
Number 12, the committee's work programme. Yes? Right.
Recommended delegate authority
Oh, and so
to these 2 points.
shall I just, I'll read them out actually. So the committee has recommended to 1, agree its work programme for 17-18 Assembly year, including the schedule of prospective topics for forthcoming meetings set out in paragraph 4.17. Then to delegate authority to the chair in consultation with the deputy chair and party group leads to agree the scope and terms of reference for an investigation into emerging transport technology. Touched on that today, I think. And delegate authority to the chair in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to respond to the mayor's draft transport strategy on behalf of the committee. Are you happy to agree with that?
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. No, I made that point actually. I did. Good. Well, welcome, Councillor Julian Bell, who's the Chair of London Council's Transport and Environment Committee. We've met before, Julian, I know, so nice to see you again. And also welcome to Lily Marston, Head of Strategy and Outcomes in TfL. I don't think we have met before, but nice to see you today. This is the second section of the meeting, and my colleagues and I will be asking you a few questions. I don't know if you've managed to see much of the earlier meeting, but that was with the actual car club organisations, and I apologise for the slight delay, but actually there are quite a lot of interesting things to say. Right, so I'm going to kick off with the TfL's car club strategy and ask, what progress have TfL and London councils made with their car club strategy?
Kick off, Julia?
Go on.
Yeah. Good morning, and thanks very much for the opportunity to come along and talk about this. So the car club strategy to which you refer was a joint exercise. In fact, we came together as a coalition with the operators and industry representatives that you just talked about. So really, it's a jointly owned initiative that we've been taking forward with them together, and perhaps Alistair or others were outlining some of the work they've done. In terms of the work that was particularly for TfL to take forward, we are obviously funding Car Plus to hold a number of initiatives each year to bring boroughs together to provide direct technical advice to officers in terms of the deployment of car club bays, and we're developing new toolkits, for example, for the deployment of electric vehicles. We've also taken forward a number of the actions around improving the TfL website and the offering that shows around TfL car club operators, where you can now get information in terms of bays and links through to the operators' websites. There are some of the other actions that sit with the operators or with Car Plus or the BVLRA, which are also to take forward. So I think jointly we are moving it forward. There's still a lot of work to do. Membership has gone up. You'll be aware that there was a target set within that document, informed by work that Zipcar had commissioned to achieve 1 million members by 2025. So membership has gone up around 30% over the last 2 years, so that's encouraging. But I think we need a further and faster acceleration, and I think some of the policy issues and things we'll talk through here will delve into how we promote, how we would like to address that.
First of all, I should declare an interest in that I'm a member of Zipcar. But from the borough perspective, the Car Club Coalition's continuing to have meetings. I think we feel that there is a need to improve the focus of those meetings. We've talked about the need for a car club charter and also looking to provide models of best practice for boroughs, and again that's something that we're looking to try to do possibly by the autumn of this year. I think certainly from the borough perspective there's more work that needs to be done in terms of different models and how they operate, particularly flexible models. I think boroughs have recognised that there are some advantages to flexible models, and some are already actively hosting those. But I think broadly we want to see more independent data on those. I think that's probably it at this point, other than to say that clearly the aspirations of the car club strategy of substantially increasing the numbers of car club members, 50% electric by 2025 are really good ambitions, and again it's about making sure that people know about those and are focused on those and seeking to drive them forward and achieve them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, why do you think TfL and London councils want to promote car clubs? And do you know how this will feature in the upcoming Mayor's transport strategy?
I'll probably hand over to Lily on that one.
Yeah, let me kick off. I'm sure there'll be things you want to add, Julian. So TfL has worked with the boroughs to support car clubs for a long time, for well over 10 years, both supporting it through direct advice and research, as well as through the local implementation plan guidance. And the reason that we've done this is, although it's not, it's not dead certain from all the research and monitoring, that where you do get the evidence back, it does show that car clubs can be a really effective mix of improving people's transport choices. And I'm sure that the operators informed you of different statistics in terms of the increased use by car club members in terms of public transport choice or walking and cycling. Certainly, my experience of talking with other European cities is car clubs are seen as part of the urban mobility mix. And so that is why we have been promoting them within London. Within the new Mayor's transport strategy, you will have already seen the directions that the new administration is setting with A City for All Londoners or Healthy Streets for London, are the two documents which have previously been published, which are very strong in terms of reducing car dependency in London and promoting a really strong shift to walking, cycling and public transport. And therefore, the transport strategy that you'll see published later this month will be articulating that in a lot more detail. And obviously, I can't go into that here. But within that, the role of car clubs will have a strong role, albeit we need to understand in which parts of London we need different types of mode shift. And we already have very high sustainable transport use in areas like central London. It's already nearly 90% in terms of sustainable transport. And therefore, we've consistently had conversations with car club operators around the particular benefits that we see in exploiting opportunities in outer London in particular, where we feel that car clubs as part of a broader sustainable transport mix could really help to reduce car dependency. And indeed, I was involved in a project a number of years ago in Sutton and in Richmond, the Smarter Travel programs, where we were actively promoting, advertising, leafleting households around the benefits of car clubs. And it's within that kind of context as a sustainable transport package in those kind of locations that we think this could really play a role.
Did you want to add to that, Councillor?
Yeah, just briefly. I think, as I've said earlier, there's a kind of a mix in terms of enthusiasms from boroughs for different models. And I think, again, there's a need for more independent research to back those floating car club models. So, again, I think it's clear, as Lily said, there's a difference between inner and outer. My borough has most of its car club use in the eastern part of it, in Acton and around Ealing, and we're less well endowed with car club vehicles in the further reaches of the borough to the west, in Greenford and Northolt. So it's a case of, I think, working with the car clubs to provide the infrastructure and make sure that there is the opportunity for people to realise that this is the right way forward. I think we are fully behind it. We hope that the Mayor's transport strategy is as behind car clubs as I think the boroughs are and London councils. And I think it clearly is part of the mix for a sustainable transport system. And clearly, even with the floating models, the evidence does seem to suggest that there is a reduction in car ownership and usage with those floating models as well.
Thank you. Finally, probably just for Mr. Marston, have there been any changes in policy on car clubs since the new mayor was elected that you're aware of?
No, I don't think. I mean, obviously, as I said, the Mayor's transport strategy will be published shortly. This sits within a broader policy around urban mobility, and I think the MTS, when it comes out, will be that articulation of the new policy. There hasn't been a specific change in policy on car clubs out with that policy development.
Right. But we may see something in the new transport strategy.
The new transport strategy is a new transport strategy, and it's very ambitious, and it will set a new direction in London. And I think I was sitting listening to some of the comments at the end about what some of the operators are hoping for, and I very much hope that that will help give people the direction they feel that London needs on that.
Right. Thank you. Can I look to Assembly Member Russell?
Thank you. So this is a section looking at the impacts of car clubs, and questions for you, Lily. Firstly, obviously we know that we've sort of seen broad evidence about car club use reducing the number of people owning cars in London, which reduces pressure on parking and all the other benefits, and means that people are less likely to travel by car for local journeys. So, to what extent we've got different models also, obviously, of car clubs. So we've got the fixed bay, where you get a car, you take it and do a trip, and you bring it back to that same fixed bay. We've also got the sort of the floating drive now model as well. And to what extent do you think these one-way car clubs encourage people to drive more than using other sustainable transport modes? Do you think, how do you think that one-way, where you can park anywhere you like?
Well, as part of last year's annual survey of car clubs, we worked with CarPlus to include specific monitoring questions around that. So the evidence that they would be including in that was largely drawn from the experience of Drive Now's operating in North East London. So it is obviously regional specific and specific to that operation. That, though, however, it wasn't exactly similar, it did seem to parallel the findings of the fixed point car club model, i.e. that the type of people using those schemes were also citing increased public transport, walking and cycling. there is a wide range of evidence here, and I've got the evidence pack here for our car club strategy. And so in some cities such as Seattle, it perhaps wasn't as positive in the short term, and there was some evidence of reducing public transport use. And it's why one of the findings of of us working with the coalition was to set up this monitoring framework and to encourage all operators to be as open as possible with the data on that. And we are now working closely with Bolloré, who are due to launch their free-floating, this is not quite free-floating because obviously it goes back to one of their bays, model in Hammersmith and Fulham at some point this month, to try to get the data from that and to do some real follow-on impacts, because I do think we need more evidence on that. So in summary, there seems to be broad support that they are demonstrating similar benefits to other schemes. I do think we need to do some more evidence around that.
So just to be clear, what is the evidence gathering process? Because presumably there are other businesses wanting to set up free-floating car clubs, and potentially, because with the current Drive Now one, which is a contained area, and I understand from their data that a lot of the journeys follow routes that are not well served by public transport, so that kind of shows it filling in a gap in public transport. But are you doing that kind of analysis to see where the journeys are and whether
we can get access to the data? Yes, we will, which is why we want to do that. That's why we're partnering to get the data in the...
Okay, so at the moment that analysis isn't going on in terms of TfL doing it?
So we're not with what you're saying in terms of the Drive Now data, but with that new scheme going live, we would be looking to get that evidence. Similarly, that's exactly why we've tasked in the Car Club Coalition strategy, BVLRA and Car Plus are tasked with setting up a monitoring framework to gather that evidence and put it out and make it available not just to TfL but to boroughs and everyone else as well.
And the other thing is the decision-making process for this. Does it sit with TfL and the boroughs, or does it sit mainly with the boroughs?
In terms of those decisions about whether to allow it onto those streets, that's entirely with the boroughs.
Okay, and so does the mayor have any sort of strategic oversight of the expansion of car clubs?
Yes, and I think that I mean, it's a really good question, because in terms of TfL's role here on behalf of the mayor, the most important thing I would argue is in terms of the strategic policy framework you said, the sort of championing, if you like, that Jonathan was mentioning in his closing statement. That is a role at a strategic transport authority level. But in terms of, we only control 5% of the road network. And most of that is the main roads in London, where there's very, very limited parking. So in terms of physically being able to help the car clubs provide locations, that's not something we can do. But promotion, the journey planning type of stuff, the policy framework, the technical advice to boroughs, the use of our website, those are all areas that we've been exploiting and using, and then trying to direct the boroughs as much as we can through the local implementation plan guidance. But the day-to-day operational decisions are entirely between the boroughs and the car club operators. And it does make a complex landscape, which is not the same as many of the other European cities that you have heard about, such as Paris and Berlin. I spend a lot of time talking to these cities. They usually control almost all the road networks. And it means that a citywide decision is a lot easier. Now, that's not the landscape we have in London.
And do you have enthusiasm from the outer London boroughs, where that seems to be the area where we've got fewest car club members at the moment? So presumably there is potential there for reducing the numbers of cars on the road.
There is, but I think that's probably where Julian can better comment on behalf of the boroughs.
Yeah, and certainly I know that there are plans for outer London boroughs in the west to set up with Drive Now a floating model. And I think broadly there's enthusiasm for car clubs across the board, whichever model it is. I think the concerns that boroughs had for the floating model was that it didn't replace commuting on public transport and radial routes, but it seems the evidence that Drive Now are presenting shows, as you say, that there are more kind of orbital journeys taking place, and there's always a cry in the outer boroughs for more orbital public transport. So I think that that is potentially an opportunity to fill that gap that's clearly there for orbital routes. But I think, as I've said earlier, the boroughs who are a little bit more cautious than some of those that have already taken up the free-floating model is to have independent research which confirms what we think is probably the case.
Is that independent research likely to happen, or are we looking at this collaborative approach that Lily was talking about earlier?
We've looked at whether or not we as London councils can get some commission some research on that lines, and I think that would be money well spent by us to do that. But we'd want to work with TfL, I think, as well in terms of commissioning that research.
Yeah, I mean, and not to say that we aren't continuing to fund Car Plus annual survey every year, which is providing hard data on what is happening with schemes that are up in operation. So that provides a really good longitudinal look at the data over recent years, and now includes obviously those using free-floating models.
And would you, presumably the data that you'd look at would also be looking at whether there's any discouragement to cycling, and also whether there's discouragement from using public transport with these free-floating
In terms of
models.
the survey questions, it should pick up those.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Topler, I believe you're going to take up number 9. Yeah, thank you.
This is to Julian. To what extent are boroughs supportive of providing parking spaces for car clubs?
We use our planning powers, particularly for new developments, quite extensively now to make sure that we promote car clubs, and I have to say, add that we're working on cycle clubs as well in new developments too. But you know, it's commonplace that in new developments you would get a policy whereby new residents in those developments are not able to buy controlled parking zone permits in the surrounding streets, and therefore you know, if they wish to have access to a car, the best and most convenient way for them to do that is through a car club, and that is cited on the development, and we provide those spaces for that to take place. I think there's an issue of boroughs actually going back after a development's been built out to make sure that the planning decision that was made to provide those car club bays has been actually implemented. So I think that's really important. But I think generally, certainly in my experience in my borough, you know, although there's often significant pressure on residential parking spaces generally, we can normally eke out the necessary bays for car clubs, and I think you know, we've had them in Ealing since yeah, the late 90s, so it's now part of the fabric of a borough to have that network of car club bays.
I know this will vary, but you know, how many car club bays would you have on a, you know, per unit, for example, compared with if you were providing parking for you know, ordinary parking for residents?
Yeah, I couldn't give you off the top of my head an answer to that. I'm happy to kind of get back to you on that.
I mean, just to pick up on that, in the car club strategy, so the current sort of balance is around 60 members per car club car. And one of the commitments within the strategy is that the operators would look to increase the efficiency of use, if you like, to around 100 members, so that you're getting a lot more potential users per car. That involves increasing the density of members, obviously, in an area. So it needs to work at both ends, both from the operators trying to drive the membership to the car ratio as well, so that we can build that towards that target without necessarily needing exactly the same number of spaces as we might have previously done.
And I mean, what do you think the Mayor can do in the London plan to increase the number of spaces? What sort of support would you like to see there?
I think we want to see some enthusiastic support for car clubs and the promotion of them, and obviously as the boroughs will work closely with the Mayor and his team to do that and achieve that. I think we are all faced in the same direction, and I think the points that were made in the earlier session about integration of car clubs into the whole kind of suite of public transport is key to that. So I think I'd reiterate everything that I heard earlier about those kind of integration points.
And do you think car clubs are placing any pressure on parking provision, particularly with the one-way model? Is that a concern?
The way that operates is that the boroughs decide which controlled parking zone areas they will allow floating car club users to park in, and so we retain that control over where they are dropped off. So I think that allows us to avoid the areas where it's just absolutely saturated and there isn't the space, and put them in places where there is the capacity. So clearly, there are always challenges, but my understanding of it is that it, for those boroughs that are operating the floating car club model, given that you've got that flexibility to park within any part of a controlled parking zone, it works.
So, thank you. Thank you very much. Assembly Member Bailey.
Hi, I'd just like to direct my comments around increasing membership. We have this target of 1 million car club users by 2025. How likely do you think that is to be met?
Put that up first. I think it requires a lot of commitment from both operators, boroughs, London councils and TfL to work towards that. As I said, that we've seen the membership grow by 30% in the last couple of years. I think that takes us slightly off the trajectory of actually reaching that, but it's not that far off. I think also we need to think about, we're moving into, obviously it's frustrating for you that we're having this conversation in advance of the Mayor's transport strategy coming out, but I would hope that that would better set the kind of policy and strategic framework for the development of that moving forward. But also, I would also, and I did in the context of working in a coalition with the operators, challenge them that they have a key role in terms of marketing themselves, raising awareness. We've undertaken a number of focus groups to try to look at the potential for this, and membership awareness is still very low amongst Londoners. So I do think things like, using our website as we're doing, using it in a strategic sense, and when we talk about it as part of the solution is really important, but part of the solution also rests with the operators themselves in terms of getting their product known.
Let me just slightly jump forward. Do you think that these car club sharing apps should be integrated with TfL more? Is there more you could do? Should I be able to book on your website and seamlessly book one of these apps as well?
So we can't, obviously TfL doesn't enable journeys to be booked on its website now anyway, but we obviously have the Oyster system, and contactless is increasingly the means by which people pay for journeys within London. And we've had loads of conversations over the years in terms of, does it make sense to integrate, this was previous to contactless, into the Oyster system? We've basically had the last sort of big conversation we had around it. We sort of asked operators to set out sort of a consistent customer offering that they might want to have those discussions on. If you're integrating it in Oyster, there are significant costs that would be involved that we wouldn't be able to cover because of state aid rules. So the operators themselves would need to be able to cover that. And to a degree, I think we as a business are moving towards contactless. So I think the issue is more around the role of apps, the role of public information and journey planning. And I was spending some time sitting in the audience looking at City Mapper and stuff, which obviously is the kind of app that a very large number of Londoners use, and Google Maps, both showing a multitude of different transport options. They don't currently have car clubs on them. And there's a question, you know, how can the car club operators either also work either with those app providers or with TfL? And we are very interested in that. We are interested in that, but we're not, it's not to make it sound difficult, it is quite complex. And our role as a state body is quite constrained in terms of what we can do.
Have you considered any financial incentives to help increase car club membership?
Well, TfL has funded, through the local implementation plan, fixed car club base for a number of years. And we are enabled to do that, but we aren't enabled as a public body to directly fund incentives to private companies.
Now, could you do it to users, to Londoners? Could you make Oyster cards cheaper, or if you'd given up your car and become a car club member or something like that?
I think there, I mean, and I was listening in earlier, there's a live discussion around what you've been calling mobility as a service and types of travel packages and their role in modal shift. I think that is a really live conversation that we need to take forward. I don't have any specific proposals to set out for you now, but I think it is something we're thinking about.
Okay. Just to jump about a bit and address these comments to Councillor Bell, to what extent are car clubs being used to replace the fleets of, council of authority fleets? Is there any evidence that that's being done?
It certainly is. Certainly my borough uses them. We have car club bays within our own council car park at our main offices next to the town hall. And I know that's common and most boroughs do that. I think we need to push it more and have more usage and also I think one area where there's probably a gap at the moment is in terms of commercial use and all the kind of white vans and you know, whether there's a role for car clubs in trying to share some of that commercial white van traffic which is so clogging up our roads. I think there's an opportunity there, and again councils need to be, the boroughs need to be kind of leading the way on how they use those types of vehicles for some of their housing repairs and all of those kind of things. So it's been done, but more could be done.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, can I call on Assembly Member Sotar? Thank you.
Hi. I just want to talk about driverless cars and any discussion that TfL had with the car clubs about the introduction of these into their fleets.
In terms of driverless cars into the car club, no, I haven't discussed those with that specific issue with the car club operators. But as one of the earlier participants was saying, most of our conversations to date have focused on promoting electric vehicles. And in a way, I think that's probably a more urgent issue for us to address, particularly as we've got the commitment to 50% of car club vehicles being ultra-low emission by 2025, but also in terms of the air quality crisis that we're facing in the city. So we have certainly been discussing with that. We are developing a toolkit for the boroughs to help them with technical information, how to retrofit car club bays in terms of charging. We're working together with London councils and the GLA on a project called the Go Ultra Low City Scheme, which is about electrifying a number of both residential and car club bays across London. And for the moment, that's been my attention. Now, we have broader discussions within our strategy development around autonomous vehicles, but it hasn't just specifically focused on car clubs.
What's your assessment of the impact of autonomous vehicles on the transport policy of London?
Well, I think we need to future-proof our transport policy. I think we need to future-proof our transport policy to make sure that we are able to adapt, able also not to lose the benefits, many of the benefits that we gain from our current transport system. And I talk about that in all of its modes in terms of walking, cycling, active travel, and active travel as part of accessing public transport. Because unless we look at what regulations and how we use space, all of those could be compromised by the use of autonomous vehicles. So again, the transport strategy is looking to establish some principles by which we would manage the introduction of that kind of technology.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, Assemblymember Pigeon.
Can I just pick up something from earlier? There was a discussion, and from the operators, they were sort of saying what their ask would be of TfL. And it was clearly things like wanting to be on the journey plan that you just discussed, be able to book things through their potential, all that sort of thing. Is that really the role of TfL when these are private companies? I'm being devil advocate here because, you know, generally I think our discussion we're quite supportive of car clubs. Actually, they are private companies there to make a profit. Is that your role and the borough's role to effectively be promoting these companies through your websites and the like?
Well, so currently they're not on Journey Planner. And you would have seen in my response to Assemblymember Bailey that the fact that they are private companies does raise significant limitations, actually, in terms of the role that we can play in terms of either investing or promoting them. But nevertheless, I think there are lessons to learn from other European cities in particular, where they have developed sort of urban mobility models as part of a wider package, perhaps linked to low-car housing, and that so maybe not sort of core within the journey planner, but where you're actually talking about travel packages. And I think that our travel solutions for particular areas. And so, I mean, there are some reasons why we don't have them on as part of our core journey planner now. But that's not to say that within the transport strategy, within the areas where we believe they could reduce car use, and I've talked earlier about outer London or certain locations, we do believe they have an important role to play. But yes, we're constantly treading that line between what is the right role for us as a strategic transport authority to be supportive. And I think we've got that right now. I mean, just to recap, we are making information accessible on our website. We are helping the boroughs with technical advice. We have funded the provision of car club days to date. We are funding the industry body that helps collect this information and makes that information available to help everyone be informed and make the right kind of choices. And I believe that has been the right approach to date. But obviously, the fact you're looking at this in detail will, I'm sure, come up with some good suggestions about what we might do more.
And also the Mayor's transport strategy, which I realise is not being released till next week, what clearly came out from the operators is they wanted a strong political direction, a real sort of strategic endorsement of different models as part of the transport offer. Is that something we might see in the strategy next week, do you think?
You're going to see a very ambitious strategy for London, of which car clubs are part of.
Yeah, well, that's really good to hear. Now, you keep citing certain cities around this new urban model. Which cities particularly do you think we should be looking at?
Excuse me. So I know that previously operators were talking to you about Berlin. And so Berlin is a city where they have had quite extensive car club use. Similarly, Paris obviously has its own model of electric vehicle car club. Now, there's less members of that than there are of car club members in London now. But again, it gives you an alternative model. And if you talk to Parisian counterparts, they will suggest that it's been quite important, in particular in raising the visibility and acceptance of ultra-low emission vehicles. So for each city, you can take particular benefits and also particular issues that may have arisen with deployment. I speak frequently with the cities of Berlin, Paris, Amsterdam, and probably those are the main ones. Vienna.
And we had Helsinki mentioned earlier in terms of their sort of integrated ticketing finance.
They have really been innovative in terms of developing that kind of travel package, that mobility as a service, yes. And I think so that's a slightly different thing. That's a really interesting initiative in terms of communicating with citizens, if you like, about what your wider travel options are. And that is something I think, I'd love to do more work and some thinking on. So I definitely think that is something we should be thinking about. We may come up against complications in terms of actual deployment, but Helsinki, in terms of its innovativeness, in terms of ticketing and integrated ticketing, it's really interesting.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you.
I mean, just picking up on that, I mean, the Transport for London is both acting as an operator of services here and also wants to be the fair player, right? I mean, is Helsinki a city where the transport system is operated locally by the local authority as being just, rather than being a organisation or a city which is providing the best solution for citizens? I mean, there's a conflict of TfL being an operator of services and also trying to be a fair broker of the best solutions for the residents in any given journey. Are we seeing this sort of conflict in other cities too?
Well, we're not developing Helsinki's
No,
model at the moment.
exactly, but I'm saying the conflict TfL has a right. At one level, it's a provider of transport services. At the same time, it's trying to be a broker of the best solution for any given journey, right? And you're saying there's a conflict of the fact that a company is a private operator, right, causes certain conflicts for you.
Hope I'm answering the right question. I'm not sure
Well,
entirely.
hopefully I'm asking the right question.
So TfL plays many roles. Obviously, we work with the Mayor's Office to help set the transport strategy. So part of that is objectively trying to look at what we believe the right transport strategy is for a growing city to grow sustainably and to deal with some of its environmental and social challenges. And we put out guidance and advice on that, which a number of different operators, whether it's private companies or the boroughs or different stakeholders, will then, through their own local democratic processes or governance processes, implement. And we are also a public transport operator. But I don't see that there's a conflict of interest there, but I might not.
Well, maybe the question I'm really asking is it when Assembly Member Payne asked a question that they're a private company, why should you be promoting it, right? I'm asking the question the other way around. Why shouldn't you be promoting it if that's the best solution for a given journey? That's the question I'm asking.
Bus companies are private companies, aren't they?
Pardon?
All the bus
No,
companies
I'm not
are
saying
private
that if a given journey is best provided by a private provider, why shouldn't you be providing? Why shouldn't you be giving this information to your citizens?
Okay, so are you thinking within the context of Journey Planner in particular?
Yes.
Yes, I think that's a fair challenge. Although we don't, to get that kind of information would require it's quite technically complex to have that in terms.
But it's been done at other cities we've heard. We know that the technology allows that to happen, right?
Well, you can include the distance of journey by car, yes, and. I don't know. I think we should take that away and look at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point.
You done? Yeah? Okay. All right, well, thank you very much indeed. Nice to meet you and thank you for your contribution. Councillor Bell, good to see you as always. Thank you very much. We've got one item, I think, 2 items just to do. If you just hold on for 2 seconds while we just clean up and then we'll be finished. Thank you. So if I can just ask members the date of next meeting. We agreed on that, 12th of July. Okay, and any other business as none I'm aware of? No. And can we note the points made by all the people here today? Yeah? Thank you. Right, thank you.
Very good, well done.
GLA Chamber Sound. 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 GLA Chamber Sound.